12 hours, the solicitor whispered, and Blackridge will no longer be yours. Duke Alexander Whitmore stood motionless beside the dying fire. One hand closed around a silver pocket watch whose measured ticking seemed louder than the rain striking the tall library windows. Midnight had settled over Blackridge Hall like a funeral veil. Candlelight trembled across shelves of dark mahogany, sealed documents, and the stern portraits of men who had never imagined their legacy might be lost before noon. Across the desk, Mr. Bennet lowered his eyes. The late Duke's will was mercilessly clear. Alexander had to enter a lawful marriage before 12 o'clock the following day, or the northern estates would pass to his cousin, Charles Whitmore. Worse, Charles would become guardian to 8-year-old Lucy, the orphan child sleeping somewhere above them beneath a roof that might soon belong to a man she feared. There must be another interpretation, Alexander said. His voice was controlled, but the watch chain cut into his palm. There is none, Your Grace. Mr. Bennet gathered the papers with nervous fingers. The marriage must be witnessed, recorded, and completed before the courthouse bell strikes noon. Alexander turned toward the rain-blackened glass. For 38 years, no one had heard him ask for mercy. He had rebuilt failing farms, faced hostile creditors, and buried the woman he once expected to marry without allowing society to witness a single fracture in his composure. Yet law had achieved what grief could not. It had placed him on the edge of helplessness. "Leave us," he said. The solicitor bowed and departed. Only then did Alexander speak the words that tasted like defeat. "I need a wife by tomorrow." A soft sound came from the shadowed end of the library. Clara Hayes stepped forward, carrying the estate ledger against her plain gray dress. She had remained late to reconcile the Northfield accounts, unnoticed by men accustomed to treating quiet women as part of the furniture. Rain had loosened a strand of brown hair near her temple, but her expression held neither alarm nor eagerness. Alexander's gaze hardened. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough to know Lucy is in danger." "This does not concern you." Clara crossed the carpet and placed the ledger upon his desk. Several names had been marked in careful black ink. Families owing rent. Widows behind on winter payments. Laborers whose cottages stood on the northern land Charles would inherit. "It concerns everyone written here," she replied. "Your cousin has already prepared eviction notices. He expects to own Blackridge by tomorrow afternoon." Alexander studied her face, searching for ambition disguised as concern. "And you believe you can prevent that?" "I believe I can marry you." The fire shifted behind him. For the first time that night, the Duke looked genuinely startled. Then suspicion returned, cold and familiar. He drew a blank check from the desk and placed it between them. "Name your price." Clara did not touch it. Instead, she closed the silver watch in his hand and met his eyes with a calmness no lady of his acquaintance had ever dared show him. "I do not want your money, Your Grace. Everyone wants something." "Yes," she said. "I want 3 promises." The clock on the mantel struck 1, each note falling through the library like a warning. Alexander looked from Clara to the ledger of endangered families, then toward the ceiling, where Lucy slept beneath the protection of a man who had only 11 hours left to remain her guardian. "What promises?" he asked. Clara rested her fingertips upon the names. "First, you must prove that becoming your wife will not require me to become silent." Alexander's eyes remained on Clara's hand, resting above the list of names as though she were guarding every family written there. "You presume a great deal," he said. "I presume only that a promise made under pressure reveals less than the manner in which it is kept afterward." The rain pressed harder against the windows, blurring the dark grounds beyond Blackridge Hall. Clara opened the ledger and turned it toward him. Each page held columns of rent, winter shortages, and unexplained penalties added during the months Charles had supervised the northern district. Alexander leaned closer. The figures were precise, too precise to dismiss. "These charges were not authorized," he said. "No," Clara replied, "but they bear your seal." His jaw tightened. For years, he had believed distance was discipline. He had left stewards to manage details while he protected the estate through contracts, courts, and careful investments. Now the ink before him showed what distance had allowed. "Why did you not bring this to me sooner?" "I tried." Clara drew 3 folded letters from the ledger. Each one carried his office stamp, unopened. "Your secretary returned them." Alexander recognized the handwriting on the outer notes. Instructions from Charles, directing all Northfield complaints away from the Duke until the annual review. A quiet betrayal committed not with scandal, but with routine. And now you offer marriage as a remedy? His voice had lost some of its frost. I offer my name beside yours before Charles can place his above everything you failed to see. Alexander reached for the blank check once more. Your brother has debts. Clara's expression changed only slightly. You investigated me. I investigate anyone who proposes becoming Duchess of Blackridge. Thomas owes $80 to the apprenticeship house, she said. My father died owing money for medicine he gave away to families who could not pay. I know exactly what desperation costs. Alexander pushed the check nearer. This would settle all of it. Clara took up his pen. For one breath, he believed he had been right about her. Then she wrote 3 lines and turned the paper around. Lucy Whitmore, Saint and School, the Northfield families. Those are my price, she said. The simplicity of it unsettled him more than greed would have. You ask nothing for yourself. I ask to remain myself. From the corridor came the faint creak of a floorboard. Lucy stood in the doorway in a white nightgown, one hand closed around a worn cloth rabbit. Her pale face was solemn beneath loose golden curls. Is Cousin Charles coming? She asked. Alexander's composure faltered. He crossed the room, but Lucy stepped toward Clara instead. Clara knelt and wrapped the child's shawl more securely around her shoulders. Not tonight, she said gently. And not tomorrow, if your uncle keeps his word. Lucy looked up at Alexander with frightened gray eyes. Will you? The Duke glanced at the sealed order, the pocket watch, and the woman who had asked for no jewels, no fortune, and no affection. Only protection for those who possess none. Yes, he said. Clara rose slowly. Then there is something else you must know. The nearest courthouse cannot record the marriage in time. Reverend Hale can do so at St. Mark's Chapel, but it is nearly 30 miles north. Alexander looked toward the storm, swallowing the road. Clara closed the ledger. We have less than 11 hours, Your Grace, and Charles has already sent men to close the bridge. Alexander did not waste another minute. He sent for the head groom, ordered the strongest carriage prepared, and instructed Mrs. Doyle to dress Lucy for travel. Clara remained beside the library desk while he signed 3 urgent directives, each stroke of his pen sharp enough to betray the anger he refused to voice. The first suspended every eviction in Northfield. The second froze all penalties added under Charles Whitmore's authority. The third summoned the estate magistrate to inspect the altered accounts. Clara watched him seal the papers. That is not yet the promise, she said. Alexander lifted his gaze. The orders protect them, until you choose to withdraw them. You question my word before I have given it. I question power without restraint. Silence settled between them, broken only by the clock and the soft hiss of rain against the glass. No woman in Blackridge society would have spoken to him with such calm defiance. Most feared his displeasure. Others performed courage when they wanted something from him. Clara did neither. She simply stood before him as though rank were a coat he wore rather than the measure of his soul. Very well, he said. State your first condition. Clara opened the ledger to a page bearing 27 names. No family living on Blackridge land will lose a home because one failed harvest, one illness, or one winter has left them unable to pay. Their debt may be reviewed. Their labor may be fairly negotiated. But poverty will not be treated as a crime. Alexander's expression hardened. You ask me to surrender the right to govern my own estate. I ask you to govern it. The words landed with greater force than accusation. He looked again at the forged charges, the unopened letters, and the evidence of suffering hidden beneath his seal. His title had protected him from inconvenience. It had not protected his people from neglect. You believe I am responsible, he said. I believe responsibility remains with the man whose name appears above every order. Clara's voice softened, though her eyes did not. Even the orders he never bothered to read. For a moment, anger rose within him, old and instinctive. Then he remembered Lucy in the doorway, asking whether he would keep his word. He drew a fresh sheet of paper toward him. Dictate it. Clara did. He wrote every condition without interruption, then signed his full name beneath the final line. Alexander Whitmore, Duke of Blackridge. He pressed the ducal seal into dark red wax and placed the document in her hands. There, he said. The first promise. Clara studied the seal, but did not smile. The first proof. A servant entered to announce that the carriage was ready. Wind swept through the opening door, carrying the scent of wet stone and cold earth. Lucy appeared moments later in a navy wool coat, clutching her cloth rabbit beneath one arm. Alexander frowned. She is not coming. Lucy's face went still. Clara lowered herself beside the child. Why do you wish to go? Because Cousin Charles comes when Uncle Alexander leaves. The room seemed to contract around the small confession. Alexander looked toward Mrs. Doyle, who lowered her eyes. He visited twice last month, the housekeeper admitted. He told Lady Lucy that Blackridge would soon belong to him. Alexander's hand closed around his watch. Clara rose and met his gaze. Then she comes with us. He wanted to object. The roads were dangerous, the storm uncertain, and St. Mark's Chapel lay almost 30 miles away. Yet leaving Lucy behind now seemed the greater risk. He gave one curt nod. Minutes later, the three of them stepped into the waiting carriage. As Blackridge Hall disappeared behind curtains of rain, Clara noticed a lantern moving along the distant ridge. Then another. Riders were already heading north. Charles had begun closing the road before they had even left the estate. The carriage rolled north beneath a sky without stars, its lanterns casting weak circles over the rain-dark road. Inside, Lucy sat close to Clara, her cloth rabbit tucked beneath her chin, while Alexander watched the moving lights on the ridge through the misted window. They are taking the eastern road, he said. It reaches the bridge 2 miles before we do. Clara tightened the wool blanket around Lucy's shoulders. Then Charles does not intend merely to delay us. He intends to make the deadline impossible. Alexander struck the carriage roof with the silver handle of his cane. The driver urged the horses faster, but the wheels sank deep into mud softened by hours of rain. Every jolt made the lamps tremble and threw long shadows across Alexander's face. Lucy said nothing. She had learned too young that frightened adults often mistook silence for courage. Clara felt the child's fingers grow colder around hers. Tell me about St. Mark's, Clara said gently. Lucy looked up. There is a bell in the tower. A very old bell, Alexander added after a pause. My mother claimed it could be heard 6 miles away on a clear morning. Will it ring for us? Lucy asked. Alexander opened his pocket watch. If we reach it in time. The answer was honest, but honesty offered little warmth. Clara met his eyes across the narrow space. She does not need the time, Your Grace. She needs to know you will stay. His expression closed. I am sitting 3 feet from her. Distance is not always measured in feet. Before he could reply, the carriage slowed. The driver called down that the road ahead had flooded near Briar Hollow. Alexander opened the door and stepped into the rain. Clara followed despite his command to remain inside. Water rushed across the road in a shallow silver sheet, and beyond it stood the broken remains of the wooden bridge. Its central planks had been removed with deliberate care. No storm had done this. A dark ribbon of dawn had begun forming above the trees. Alexander stared at the gap, then at the watch in his palm. There is a hunting lodge 1/2 mile west, he said. We will shelter there until the water falls. And lose the remaining hours? Clara asked. The horses cannot cross. Then we find another road. There is none. Lucy appeared at the carriage door, her face pale. A small cough escaped her, followed by another. Clara touched the child's forehead and felt heat beneath the cold rain. Alexander saw the concern in her expression. What is wrong? She is feverish. He lifted Lucy from the carriage with a care that seemed unfamiliar even to him, holding her beneath his coat as they made their way through the trees. The hunting lodge stood among black pines, neglected but dry, with a stone hearth and enough wood stacked beside it to start a fire. Clara settled Lucy on a narrow cot and warmed water while Alexander paced near the window. You should sit with her, Clara said. You are better at this. I am a stranger to her. No, you have made yourself one. The word stopped him. Clara wrung rainwater from a cloth and placed it across Lucy's forehead. She is afraid that everyone she loves will leave. You protect her inheritance, but you leave her alone with the fear. Alexander looked toward the child. Lucy's eyes had opened, uncertain and gray. Slowly, he crossed the room and sat beside her. His hand hovered above hers before finally closing around it. I am here, he said. Lucy studied him as though deciding whether the words could be trusted. Then her small fingers curled around his. Do not go, Uncle Alexander. His breath caught. Outside, Morning began to gather behind the rain. Inside, the silver watch continued ticking, and for the first time, Alexander no longer looked at it. For several minutes, neither Alexander nor Lucy moved. The fire gathered strength behind them, filling the hunting lodge with the scent of pine smoke and damp wool. Clara stood near the small table, pretending to arrange the medicine bottle she had found in an old cabinet, though her attention remained fixed on the Duke's hand wrapped around the child's. Alexander had signed laws, commanded estates, and silenced entire rooms with a glance, yet he held Lucy as though one careless breath might break the fragile trust between them. "You should rest," he told her. "Only if you stay." "I will stay." Lucy closed her eyes, still gripping his fingers. Clara watched the promise settle over him. It was not dramatic. No witness stood nearby. No seal marked it. Yet it seemed heavier than anything he had signed at Blackridge Hall. When Lucy's breathing softened, Alexander looked toward Clara. "You believe I have failed her. I believe grief taught you to confuse distance with protection." His face hardened, but he did not release Lucy's hand. "Her father was my younger brother. I know. He trusted everyone. Charles most of all." Alexander stared into the fire. "When my brother and his wife died, Lucy looked at me as though I could explain why the world had taken them. I had no answer. So I gave her tutors, guards, doctors, every protection money could purchase. Accept yourself." The words were gentle, which made them impossible to resist. Alexander lowered his gaze to the sleeping child. "She has his eyes. And your fear." He looked up sharply. Clara stepped closer, but stopped several feet away. "That is my second condition. Lucy must never be used as an instrument of inheritance. Not by Charles. Not by the court. Not even by you. She must be allowed to become a person before she is treated as an heir. You accuse me of using her. I accuse the world around her. I ask you to promise that you will stand against it." Outside, the rain weakened to a soft tapping against the roof. Dawn had turned the windows gray. Alexander carefully freed his hand from Lucy's grasp, crossed to the table, and removed a folded sheet from his coat. The paper had been intended for legal instructions at St. Mark's. He placed it beside Clara. "Write the terms." "You should write them." "Why?" "Because this promise must come from your understanding, not my demand." For a long moment, he stood still. Then he took up the pen. The words came slowly at first. "Lucy Whitmore shall remain under my protection, but never under my possession. Her education, future, and inheritance shall not be used to secure obedience, alliance, or advantage. No marriage shall be arranged without her willing consent. No guardian shall separate her from the home and people she chooses." Alexander signed beneath it. His hand trembled once before becoming steady. He sealed the page with wax warmed over the fire and gave it to Clara. The second promise. This time, she allowed herself the faintest smile. The second proof. A sound from outside interrupted them. Hooves approached through the wet trees. Alexander extinguished the nearest lamp and moved to the window. A carriage bearing the Whitmore crest stopped beside the lodge. Charles stepped down beneath a black umbrella, followed by a lawyer and Reverend Hale himself. Alexander's face went cold. Clara understood at once. Charles had not merely blocked the road. He had brought the only man authorized to marry them directly into his own hands. Charles entered the lodge as though he had been invited, rain shining across the shoulders of his black coat and satisfaction resting lightly upon his face. Reverend Hale followed with visible discomfort, while the lawyer carried a leather case beneath one arm. Alexander stepped between them and the narrow cot where Lucy slept. "You have crossed a line," he said. Charles removed his gloves one finger at a time. "On the contrary, cousin, I have arrived to ensure the law is respected." His gaze moved to Clara, lingering just long enough to make the insult clear. "Though I confess, I expected desperation to produce a more convincing Duchess." Clara did not lower her eyes. "And I expected ambition to produce better manners." Reverend Hale cleared his throat, but Charles only smiled. "Miss Hayes, you should understand what this arrangement will make you. Society will not see courage. It will see a clerk who overheard a private crisis and reached for a title." Alexander's expression darkened. "That is enough." "Is it?" Charles opened the lawyer's case and removed a yellow document. "Perhaps Reverend Hale should know whom he is being asked to marry into the Whitmore name." Clara recognized her father's signature before Charles spoke again. Samuel Hayes was dismissed from St. Mercy Hospital after medicine disappeared from its stores. Some called it charity. The board called it theft. The room seemed to grow colder, though the fire still burned. Clara's fingers tightened around the second promise, but her voice remained steady. My father gave medicine to families who could not afford treatment. Without permission, Charles replied. A noble motive does not erase a dishonest act. Alexander turned to her. Is this true? Clara met his gaze. The dismissal is true. Something guarded returned to his face, not cruelty, but the instinctive caution of a man who had once trusted the wrong people. Charles saw it and pressed forward. There is more. Her brother's debt, her father's disgrace, her position in your household. She has every reason to secure herself before noon. Reverend Hale looked toward Clara with sorrow rather than judgment. Miss Hayes, a marriage entered for fraud cannot be blessed. Clara reached inside the ledger she had carried from Blackridge and touched the sealed letter hidden beneath its cover. The letter proved Charles had ordered the hospital accounts altered years earlier to conceal medicine sold through one of his agents. It could clear her father's name. It could also expose Margaret Cole, the elderly nurse who had secretly helped Samuel distribute the medicine and who now lived quietly with her daughter. If the letter became public, Margaret would be dragged into court, her final years consumed by scandal. Clara let the ledger close. I will not defend myself by sacrificing someone who trusted my father. Charles's smile sharpened. How noble. How convenient. Alexander studied her in silence. Clara could feel the old walls rising within him. She had asked him to trust her before giving him the whole truth. Perhaps she had expected too much from a man who had built his life around doubt. Then Lucy stirred on the cot. Clara, she whispered. Clara went to her at once. Charles watched the child reach for Clara's hand and gave a quiet laugh. You see, Alexander? She has already made herself necessary. The Duke turned slowly. No, he said. She became necessary because the rest of us failed. He moved beside Clara, placing himself between her and every accusation in the room. You speak of her father's disgrace while standing on a bridge you ordered dismantled. You speak of law after frightening a child in her own home. Whatever Clara Hayes has withheld, she has used silence to protect someone weaker than herself. You use truth only when it can wound a reputation. Charles's confidence faltered. Alexander faced Reverend Hale. Will you perform the ceremony? The Reverend glanced toward the window, where dawn had brightened to pale silver. At St. Mark's, with proper witnesses and the register present, yes. But we must leave now. Charles lifted one final paper. There is still a legal objection. Clara rose, her hand resting on Lucy's shoulder. Then make it at the chapel. Alexander looked at her, surprised by the steel beneath her calm. Clara met his eyes without hesitation. I have not survived this night to be judged in a hunting lodge. Outside, the rain had nearly stopped. Beyond the broken bridge, the first bell of St. Mark's sounded faintly through the morning air, and less than 2 hours remained. The ruined bridge left only one path forward. Reverend Hale knew of an old mill crossing nearly 3 miles west, narrow enough for a single carriage and often buried beneath spring water. Alexander ordered the driver to take it. Charles objected at once, but the Reverend stepped into Alexander's carriage before he could finish. The lawyer followed Charles, and both vehicles turned towards St. Mark's beneath a sky slowly clearing to pearl. Lucy slept against Clara's shoulder, her fever eased but not gone. Alexander sat opposite them, silent, the second promise folded inside his coat. Every few minutes, he opened the silver watch. Each time, less remained. At the mill crossing, the road narrowed between steep banks and dripping trees. The horses moved slowly over wet planks while water rushed beneath them. No one spoke until the wheels reached solid ground. Then Reverend Hale exhaled. 1 hour, he said. The final miles passed beneath rising wind. When the chapel tower appeared beyond the hills, its gray stone looked almost luminous against the morning. The bell rang once. 11 o'clock. They entered St. Mark's with rain still shining on their coats. 2 parish elders stood as witnesses, summoned by Hale's assistant. The marriage register lay open beside the altar. Charles arrived moments later, carrying his final objection like a weapon made of paper. Before this proceeds, he announced, Miss Hayes must disclose every benefit promised to her. A concealed financial arrangement would make the union fraudulent under the terms of the late Duke's will. Clara faced him without trembling. I have asked for no money. You have asked for influence over Blackridge. I have asked him to use the influence he already possesses with decency. Charles turned to Alexander. And what of the third condition? Surely even you have not agreed to marry a woman without knowing the full price. Alexander looked toward Clara. Candlelight moved across her calm face, but he saw the strain beneath it now, the weariness of a woman who had spent the night defending everyone except herself. Tell me, he said. Clara stepped closer to the altar. Promise that you will never use gratitude as a chain. The chapel fell still. Even Charles seemed uncertain. Clara continued, her voice quiet enough to require attention. I will not owe you affection because you protect my brother. I will not owe you obedience because you save the school. I will not owe you love because you keep your word to the families of Northfield. If I enter this marriage, I will fulfill every lawful duty freely agreed upon, but my heart will remain mine until I choose to give it. Alexander stared at her. Years earlier, another woman had accepted his name while loving the security it offered more than the man himself. Since then, he had believed every promise concealed a bargain. Clara offered him the opposite, a bargain that refused to counterfeit love. You ask me to accept a wife who may never love me, he said. I ask you not to demand what cannot be honorable if demanded. The clock in the tower began its slow warning before noon. Reverend Hale glanced toward the register. Your Grace, there is little time. Alexander removed his gloves and placed them beside the open book. Then hear my answer clearly. I will not purchase gratitude. I will not command affection. I will not mistake marriage for ownership. He took the pen and wrote the third promise beneath the first two. What you give me will be given freely or not at all. Clara's composure wavered for the first time, not from fear, but from the unexpected gentleness in his words. Reverend Hale motioned them forward. The vows were brief. No flowers adorned the chapel. No music softened the moment. Lucy stood between them, holding Clara's hand with one hand and Alexander's with the other. When the final signature touched the register, the tower bell began to strike 12. Charles stepped forward, pale with fury. This is not finished. Alexander closed the register. No, he said, looking at Clara rather than his cousin. It has only begun. By the time they returned to Blackridge Hall, the storm had passed, leaving the estate washed in pale afternoon light. The servants stood in the entrance hall with uncertainty written across their faces. They had expected a duke in crisis. They had not expected a duchess in a rain-damp gray dress, holding the hand of a tired child. Clara crossed the threshold without ceremony. No music greeted her. No flowers had been arranged. Only the quiet ticking of the great clock marked the beginning of her marriage. Alexander removed his coat and spoke to Mrs. Doyle. Prepare the East Suite for her Grace. Clara looked toward him. The East Suite is beside yours. Yes. That was not part of our agreement. Nor is it required. His voice remained formal, but something gentler rested beneath it. The rooms are connected by a private corridor. The door on your side will have the only key. Mrs. Doyle's eyes widened, though she wisely said nothing. Alexander reached into his pocket and placed a brass key in Clara's palm. No door in this house will ever be locked against you. His fingers withdrew before touching hers longer than necessary. Clara closed her hand around the key. Thank you. It was the first gratitude she had offered him, and he accepted it without using it as a claim. Lucy was carried upstairs to rest, but before Mrs. Doyle could leave the room, the child reached for Clara. Will you come back? After you sleep. Lucy looked toward Alexander. Both of you. He hesitated only a moment. Both of us. That evening, Clara entered the estate office rather than the dining room. Ledgers covered the long table, and the forged Northfield charges waited beneath the lamplight. Alexander found her there hours later, still wearing the plain dress in which she had married him. You have not eaten, he said. Neither have the families listed here, according to these accounts. He placed a covered tray beside her. Warm soup, bread, and tea filled the room with a simple comfort that felt strangely out of place among legal papers. The eviction orders have been withdrawn, he said. The school funds will be restored tomorrow. Clara looked up. You acted quickly. I gave my word. He said it as though the explanation were sufficient. Perhaps it was. Over the following days, Blackridge began to change in ways too quiet for society to notice. Clara reopened St. Anne's School and reviewed every tenant account herself. Alexander dismissed the secretary who had buried her letters and appointed an independent steward. He never entered her rooms without permission. He never asked whether she had begun to care for him. Instead, he left a fresh candle outside her study when she worked past midnight. She found a heavier wool cloak on the chair before a cold morning visit to Northfield. A cup of tea appeared beside her ledger exactly as she preferred it, with honey and no milk. Clara responded in equally restrained ways. She corrected the placement of his injured hand when it stiffened over long documents. She opened the curtains in the library, allowing winter sunlight to reach the room he had kept dim for years. She persuaded Lucy to read aloud at breakfast, and Alexander began attending, first in silence, then with questions, and finally with a rare smile that startled all three of them. One evening, Clara passed the nursery and heard Lucy laughing. The sound traveled through Blackridge Hall like light through stained glass. Alexander stood in the doorway, watching the child build a castle from wooden blocks. His shoulder nearly touched Clara's, though neither moved away. "You brought that sound back," he said. "We did," she replied. Their eyes met. For one suspended moment, the space between them seemed smaller than either had intended. Then a servant approached with a sealed envelope bearing the court's crest. Alexander opened it beneath the corridor lamp. His expression changed as he read. Clara saw only one line before he folded the paper. A hearing had been scheduled. Charles claimed she had accepted a secret payment for the marriage, and the money had already been placed in her brother's name. Clara read the court notice twice before the meaning settled into her chest. $5,000 had been deposited into an account bearing Thomas Hayes's name on the morning after the wedding. The document listed Alexander's estate office as the source. She looked up slowly. "Did you do this?" Alexander's silence lasted only a breath, but it was enough to wound her. "I authorized no payment," he said. "Then someone used your name. Charles. Or someone who knew I would believe it was Charles." The words were quieter than anger. That made them harder to answer. Alexander stepped toward her, but Clara closed her fingers around the brass key he had given her and placed it on the table between them. "You promised gratitude would never become a chain, and I have kept that promise. Have you?" Her voice remained calm, though her eyes had lost their warmth. "My brother's debt disappears. The school is restored. My family is protected. How am I supposed to know where kindness ends and obligation begins?" Alexander looked at the key as though it had become heavier than iron. "You think I bought your loyalty. I think I need the freedom to discover that you did not." Before dawn, Clara left Blackridge Hall. She took no jewels, no allowance, and no carriage bearing the ducal crest. She carried only her father's ledger and the 3 written promises. Lucy cried when she learned, but Clara left a note beneath the child's cloth rabbit. Some goodbyes are not endings. They are tests of whether love can survive without possession. The court hearing took place 3 days later beneath high windows and winter light. Charles presented bank records, witness statements, and the forged authorization. His argument was simple. Clara had accepted money. The marriage had been purchased. The will should be enforced, the northern estates transferred, and Lucy placed under his guardianship. Alexander listened without interruption. Clara sat across the room, composed in a plain brown dress, refusing to meet his eyes. When the judge asked whether Alexander wished to compel his wife to return to Blackridge, the courtroom became still. Charles smiled. He expected power to behave as power always had. Alexander rose. "No," Clara looked at him then. "I will not compel her residence, her affection, or her name," he continued. "If the court dissolves this marriage, she will leave with no debt to me. If the estate passes to my cousin, so be it. If I lose Blackridge, I will still keep the promise that matters most." Charles's smile vanished. Alexander placed the brass key on the judge's desk. A door is not open if a person is punished for walking through it. The judge examined the bank authorization. "Then you deny issuing this payment?" "Completely." Clara stood and opened her father's ledger. "There is a way to prove it." She had protected the sealed letter for years, but Margaret Cole had written to her that morning, granting permission for the truth to be told. The letter revealed that Charles had used the same hidden account years earlier to sell hospital medicine and had forged Samuel Hayes's name when the records were questioned. The bank clerk who processed both transactions confirmed the matching seal. By afternoon, the payment to Thomas was declared fraudulent. Charles's claim collapsed, and Lucy's guardianship remained with Alexander. Yet Alexander did not approach Clara when the court adjourned. He simply bowed and walked toward the door, keeping the freedom he had promised her. "Alexander," she called. He stopped. Clara crossed the marble floor and placed the brass key back into his hand. "You gave me the right to leave." "Yes." "Then believe me when I choose to return." For the first time, his composure broke into something gentler than relief. He closed his hand around the key, but did not close it around her. Clara stepped beside him freely. Weeks later, laughter filled Blackridge Hall again. St. Anne's School reopened, and no family in Northfield lost a home that winter. Their marriage had begun with 3 promises, but it endured because of a fourth neither had spoken aloud. Love would never be owed. It would be chosen again and again by 2 wounded hearts that had finally learned freedom was not the enemy of devotion, but the only place where devotion could truly live.